I think that it's my connection that's unstable, Chris, so I apologize. I'm recording this. If you need information, I'm gonna sort of recap everything at the end. But right now I'm just gonna start and hope that other people will join as I go. As people come onto the call, I will answer questions. But yeah, feel free to ask questions at any time in the chat, and I'll check those. So I'm gonna just share my screen and take us into the reading groups. Okay, so if you followed that link and you've joined the reading group, I'm gonna go to present mode. This is my 2 slides for today. Manifold Minis number 3, reading groups on CUNY Manifold. So the idea for reading groups for OER is that by creating a group, choosing privacy and visibility settings, you can create text-based conversations with collaborative annotation in a smaller group than the wide open public. With open pedagogy, it's great to be able to say you are a part of the greater ecosystem of knowledge and learning and sharing, but it's helpful to have smaller, safer spaces to communicate with your students and to sort of help guide them through understanding how annotation works and what it means to comment on something and what it means to comment on something publicly. So in the reading groups, you can assign annotations and comments to generate text-centered class discussion, and then you can discuss the difference between the sort of closed group annotation and a more public annotation. These are the things that we're going to talk about. I'm going to show you also how Manifold documentation is a really great resource. We haven't talked about that yet, but I want to sort of show you what it looks like for those of you who are less familiar with looking at documentation on new software. It's kind of like the user manual for Manifold, and it does get into some nitty-gritty specifics about installation and more technical things that you don't have to worry about, but the segments that are geared towards users are really, really helpful, and I want to just sort of show you the layout there. Then we'll talk a little bit about assignment ideas, teaching with annotations, and I'm going to show you how assignments are marked on the homepage of a couple of projects. So if I take you to the Manifold documentation. The Manifold documentation has this nice left menu, and this gives you all sorts of stuff. And the link specifically that I'm showing you right now is annotating, commenting, and reading groups. And this will give you the whole blow-by-blow of everything that you will want to know. So I just want to give you a sense that all the information I'm sharing today is available here as well. And it goes through with pictures and descriptions of what's going on. And it shows you the distinctions between the different types of privacy that are available in the current version of reading groups. So it's a very helpful resource, and I will share this link again afterwards. But for right now, we're going to look at what my reading groups look like in the wild. So if I am logged in, which you must be to see your reading groups, if I'm logged in, you can see that if I start at the very beginning, and I go to cuny.manifoldapp.org, I see our lovely library homepage, and I can go to my own personal icon up in the top right corner of my screen. And there, beneath Edit Profile and Notifications, you'll see this lovely Manage Groups tab. So here is where you create your reading group. And you'll see that I have quite a few reading groups. Many are sort of demos that I have set up at this point. But the group that I just created for our purposes today is the CUNY Manifold Readers Group. You'll see that I've got 14 members. As the moderator of the group, I can see all of this. If you go in on your own computer, you can see the sort of distinction between what it is to be a member of the group versus what it is to be the moderator. You can see all the members, and you have the option to remove them from the group. You can also, I believe, change someone's status so that you can have, maybe you can't. I don't know if it's possible to have 2 moderators on a group. It might not be. But you can edit the reading group to change the name of it, to change the privacy settings. So public means that anybody can see your comments. It's just a way of aggregating those comments around a specific group of people. Private means that only the people within the group are going to be able to see each other's comments. In the future version of reading groups, you're going to be able to see which groups you might join. So there will be a sort of public visibility of private groups, so that there's an ability to sort of say, oh, I might want to join that reading group. And then anonymous reading groups are so that as a moderator, you can select a group of people to read something, but they will not know the other members of the group or who wrote those comments. And this was set up for the purposes of peer review. So as I mentioned briefly before, you can join a reading group with this invitation code or with the invitation URL, which includes, as you'll see, the code that is listed in your invitation code spot. You can set it so that you have notifications when people join. If you're doing it for your class and you don't need a person by person notification, you can uncheck that. But you can save that. And when you go to the manage groups, select the manage groups and you choose the group that you're managing, this is where you would see all of the annotations that have been made in that group. So at this point, no one has annotated. If I wanted to go to a project and annotate within this group, let's say, go to the Negro and the Nation, only because it's one of the examples I have of the annotation being listed. So the annotation assignment is here on the project page as part of a markdown block, so that you can see what sort of annotations the instructor wanted to elicit from his students. So if I'm inside the text, I'm reading the text, and I decide that I want to make a comment. Here is the introduction. This manifold was created in Markdown language following the typographical style of the original. So you'll see that when I select the text, which is what you do to create an annotation of any kind, or to highlight, you can choose down at the bottom of this menu where you want to annotate or highlight. So in this case, I'm interested in doing it in the CUNY Manifold Readers group, and it will show up at the bottom saying, oh, I'm doing this in the CUNY Manifold Readers group. I can't wait to learn more Markdown. If I save that comment, and then I return to that manage groups, and I look at my group, you'll see now that that annotation is collected here so that I can see what annotations there are. And if you all wanted to comment somewhere in there and annotate that group, your annotations would show up here as well. Okay, how are we doing on time? It's 1:15. I'm going to stop the share for a second, just see. Still no new people. This is quite impressive attrition. So moving forward, and let me know if there are specific things that you are interested in seeing. It seems stable now. This is great. Okay, so everybody can hear me? We're good? You can see my screen?
Yeah, I can hear you and see you.
Great. That's fantastic. Okay, so um, got another chat. You're good now. Okay. So with the managed groups, again, this collects the annotations from the group, and you'll see that I get a summary of what those are. Now, just to show you a group that is not mine, but that has a few more annotations. This is Spring 2020 English 111. This is Krisha Michaels' class. Um, and she's got 73 annotations. I'm realizing that since these are not my students, I should not be showing this, so I'm going to go back to my own groups. But the collection works in the same way so that you have that accrual down the group. And you can see the different annotations. You can also click on a student by student basis to see who has annotated what, and you can click through. What you cannot see currently are comments related to those annotations. So if your students are commenting on someone else's annotation, which is a great way to generate conversations around specific points in the text, those notes will not be collected. It's only the original annotation that is currently collected. So it's important to keep that in mind as you're going through them. Um, I I don't know if there's a plan to change that at this point, um, but that is currently how it works. So to just go back to the annotation documentation to sort of show you how this appears here. He's got information in this documentation about all of the different aspects of creating and managing these groups, editing the groups, and it demonstrates a little bit about how you can leave a group, join a group, and see multiple annotations. I'm going to go back to my slides. So, teaching with annotations. We've collected a few ideas about how to teach with annotations if it's not something that you've done before. Doing it online is different from having your students in a class commenting in their own books. And it's one of the things that's kind of exciting about teaching with Manifold because you can have everyone looking at the same spot in the text. So this article, which is available from the CUNY Manifold Learn page, and I will send the link out again, has some sort of descriptions about how it is helpful and how you can assign it, like how to assign social annotation in different ways through the computer. So this is one example. Again, on the home page, you can have a description of what it is you're asking students to do. So there are different ways to describe how you can annotate, and you can assign certain numbers of annotations, or you can assign certain numbers of conversations to happen where you ask people to comment on their classmates' comments. I know that asking for a certain number of annotations doesn't necessarily inspire students to do the sort of deep analysis that we like to see. So giving them examples of how to annotate really helps sort of move that forward, and making it really manageable in the digital setting helps to sort of keep it in a space that is both low stakes enough and interesting enough to keep them moving. I've seen instructors assign students to annotate as characters from the books. So there are ways to have them sort of use it to talk back to the text in interesting ways. And these are just a few examples of how you can engage your students in the text. So I'm going to stop my share and open the floor to any questions. They can be about reading groups. They don't have to be about reading groups. If you guys, especially since we're such a small group, if you guys have specific questions about projects you're interested in putting on Manifold, I'm happy to talk about that. So any questions?
I'm wondering if, so the text has to be public in order to have a reading group, whether it's public or private.
Yes. So
Okay.
there, in terms of this sharing things in draft mode, the ability to share texts that aren't yet public is going to be coming with this entitlements feature development that's happening right now. So that, because for the publishers, from the publishing standpoint, they want to be able to share the text with authors before they go live. And from the OER perspective, it gives us that option to sort of have a text that may not be sort of like have full copyright availability, that we can have those closed groups. So that is coming. But at the moment, you can only have reading groups on open texts.
When is that happening?
I know, it's for all of these things that are not in the public domain, where you're like, how do I do that? That is in, let's see, it's pretty much finished. So like at this point, the underlying API, whatchamacallit, functions are in place, but they're working on the visual graphic side of it. So it's coming soon, but I don't know, like I feel as though they were planning to start testing next week. So it's like very soon, but I don't know how much will be available to us and when. Like it's possible it'll be available for the fall.
Probably be ready for, most likely. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that's where things are now. I will say, and you know, I perhaps should talk to Matt about this, but I do have a friend who's been teaching excerpts of things that are not in, you know, that are in copyright, with like clear markings that say this is an excerpt for teaching purposes, sort of, you know, little fair use flags. And she's been doing that for annotations, and it seems to be going well. There's no, she's, in some ways they're hidden because the project is just named the course name. And so it's not as though the title is immediately available for search. And I think she's been liking being able to annotate these segments, but she's using portions of chapters, so not full chapters.
And then it's pretty easy to just take everything down when the course ended.
You can delete an entire project if you want the course to come down. If you want to save it for your own purposes but not make it like public, you can revert it to draft mode. And the other thing that is coming, although it doesn't currently involve the sort of retention of those comments, but it does keep your entire text, is that there's an EPUB export.
Oh, great.
Which is very, very exciting. And I'm really, I'm really excited about this because you can create an EPUB, and they're working on lots of things with how to make that EPUB useful for publishers. What happens to the annotations if you revert to draft mode? I don't know, because I haven't tried. That's a really interesting question. My guess is that they stay, but I don't know. I don't know. I would have to try it out, and I'm a little afraid to do that. But I don't have very many comments on the projects I've made because so many of them are sort of demo projects. But
the reading group disappears when you revert to draft mode?
The reading group does not disappear. So the reading group is a separate thing from the text itself. So the reading group would stay, and I don't know what happens to annotations that get orphaned when a project reverts to draft mode or is deleted. My sense is that if there's no sort of reference text, the annotations all disappear, but I don't know the exact storage model for those, so I would have to ask.
So the reading group I thought was based on a project. Is it a reading group that could actually be across projects?
Yes, reading groups are across
Okay.
projects. So reading groups work across all projects, and the development that I keep sort of referring to about the OER development is really, the idea of it is to make that space even more productive in terms of allowing for remixing and assigning texts that you haven't created, so that your reading group is a place for collecting materials that could be, like, you could assign texts, but you could also point to resources on other projects. So the idea would be, it would be a collecting ground for all those things that you want in your course, that you want your students to talk about, but you would be able to sort of assemble materials from different places in this sort of course page that would be the reading group. So the reading group would be the place that all that material would live, without creating a brand new project and repurposing things. When it's like, there's a text there I want, there's a text there I want, you can just point to them and sort of collect those references within the reading group.
And would that be necessarily via projects, in the sense that, let me be more clear. Let's say that York College creates a project with texts in it, and those texts have chapters. Is that's
so the idea would be, any person could create a project that has chapters in it. And if that project had chapters in it, I'm pretty sure the idea is that if you want to assign one chapter from a book that someone else created, so the Scarlet Letter is on there, and you're like, you don't need to read the whole thing, you just need to read the Custom House or whatever. You can be like, that right there, I just want that chapter, and that would be sort of like pulled onto your, this like reading group course page.
okay.
So the reading group is really the space, and right now it's just working as like, this is where you can see all the annotations, but the next phase of reading groups is really that space that pulls all that content together, so that it's sort of like a shared place to put things. It's kind of like a shared bookshelf, because it's like, my reading group would read this chapter and we'll look at that resource from that project, but you could pull from across projects. And currently it would be only stuff on our instance. So there are all these sort of like schemes, because, you know, University of Minnesota Press, they have their Manifold books, and like,
I see. Yeah.
so like a lot of different presses also have Manifold books. And one of the like way down the road things is an idea of networking the different Manifold platforms and like allowing for easier communication between the different platforms, which gets super complicated because of the payment systems that are going to be eventually cropping up. But right now, it's like, if stuff is on the CUNY Manifold platform, it's like you can use anything that's there.
In the current iteration.
And in the current iteration, a reading group can comment on anything. So if you highlight anywhere, now that you're part of this reading group, if you highlight anywhere in any text, you can refer to it in your reading group.
Okay.
And it would show up on that page for the reading group, right?
But it doesn't have to.
Anytime you have to tell it that you are in that reading group. Like if you were just doing your own private annotations or your own public annotations, they would not be visible to that reading group unless they were public. I mean, but they won't show up on that page unless you have said, I am currently annotating in this group. And it remembers what you've last been editing in. So it sort of keeps it where you are, but it will always show up both on that little drop-down menu that shows up when you highlight anything, and it shows up, like you can sort of like go to your reading groups and say, oh, I'm in this reading group right now. Right now I'm starting from this reading group.
So that the next iteration, I really liked a lot of those things you're talking about there. That sounds like a major step over something like hypothesis. Is there anything right now that makes it a stronger choice for a class than something like hypothesis?
The thing that makes it a stronger choice for something like Hypothesis is that it is built into the text, so that it's just that you're not. It's sort of the annotation mechanism within Manifold works in Manifold better than Hypothesis would work on Manifold, which would get very complicated very fast. But it is also, I mean, it really depends where the text lives. The Hypothesis is a great tool, but it relies on the stability of the texts that you have, or like who's maintaining the websites that you're looking for. So if you're teaching for the course of a semester and you're like, this is fine, I just need it to persist for a semester, you know, that's fine. But if you want it to sort of live with that text for longer, the everything is sort of having it built into these texts in this way is meant to sort of like keep it as part of those for longer. So there are more specifics about how they compare, but I think for the purposes of teaching, that's the sort of like strongest, is that it is integrated into the system, and so that you're not, when you're sort of logged into Manifold, you're staying put there and you're not sort of confronting other things. It's sort of like integrated within the books that you're reading. So that would be my go-to. I haven't never taught with Hypothesis. I know people who really like doing it. I've had my students annotate in Manifold once, but it was a long time ago. And it was mostly just sort of say, where do you read? Like, what are you doing when you're reading in a computer? And they were all like, we like paper better. And I'm like, but you read online all the time. So how do you sort of train yourself to read critically in an online space? How about by practicing? So they were all like, and also it wasn't an English class, and I made them read Poe, and they were like, why are we reading this old English? I was like, it's great, guys. It's great. So, you know.
It's verbal skills. You got it.
It's great. It's really important. This is communications. They're like, we're communications majors. I'm like, so read. It's good.
A question I was trying to ask last week, and I don't think I understood the answer. And so projects contain texts, and texts can contain chapters. So can a project have several texts with several chapters within them?
It can. The main thing about that is that you don't want it to get too unwieldy. The reason to have multiple texts within a project would be sort of like if you had two editions of the same book that you wanted to show side by side and say like these two belong to the same project. So you wouldn't really want to have multiple texts in the same project that are like vastly different, unless there was like a really, do you know what I mean? So it's, you can organize it however you want to organize it, but the sort of like idea is that the project is the single-ish unit that you're working with.
But as I understand it, if you have to make a change, a text is the level at which you would have to make the change rather than a chapter. And so it would be better to have a text than a chapter.
If you are having, well, it depends how sort of finished what you're working on is. So the text by text, like having multiple texts in a project, was developed because Manifold was meant to be iterative. So the idea was, this is how you can publish chapters as they come before the finished book, in a way, and to sort of have that scholarly contact with your academic writing sort of earlier in the process. But the advantage of having multiple chapters in a single text is that if it's a textbook or a book that you're having people read all at once, it's that you're moving through the pages differently. So a single text will sort of be a long scroll. So if it's a lot of text, having those chapters, like ingesting it as multiple chapters within a single text, breaks down how much is on a page. So the click through happens at the chapter, if that makes sense. I can demonstrate.
Yeah, it's click over for chapter, but scroll for page for text
For a
or
single
with
text.
the chapter.
So a single text will have a table of contents so that you can navigate that way. Like if you've put in H1 and H2 headers throughout the single text, you will have that option for navigating from the drop-down contents menu, but you won't have that sort of like end of the page feel, go to the next thing that chapter by chapter organization would give you. Do you want me to demonstrate?
But you would have to be sure. Well, you only have 3 minutes, so.
I know. Well, technically, I'm a little bit late for my choir, which is meeting now. But
yeah, so.
I'm like, I really should go, but I'm happy to answer questions. So
yeah, maybe it'll come again as we go through. I guess I'm still working out. I don't know exactly what I'd use this for yet, but I'm wondering about changes. I don't think what I would use it for would be as permanent. Like it sounds like to make a change at the level of the sentence or the level of a section within a chapter, you have to re-ingest the whole thing.
So one of the other projects, feature development underway currently, is an editor, because even though because it was originally made as a publishing tool where it's like, no, this is just for publishing. In order to sort of like meet the needs, like the idea is not that you would ever write the whole book in Manifold, but for the purposes of, I really need to change that sentence. Zach has been working on an editor. So that's like one of those other projects that's just sitting there. It's happening, but it's, I don't know when it will be, but we can talk more about it next time. Thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And I will send out all sorts of extra information.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.